All right, so I want to welcome everyone to this class on the Noahide laws. Again, I want to welcome everyone to this class on Noahide laws, and we're going to speak. Interesting topic, and I think most of them are interesting. And that is life-threatening issues, end-of-life issues. Right, comes up. Unfortunately, the question is, how does it apply? Right, how's it going to apply to Noahide? So, 100% these issues come up. It's stressful, right? No question. Family, friends, everyone around. You don't know what's going to be, right? There's an uncertainty. And, as it's brought down, nothing worse than being in doubt. Doubt is the worst thing. Worst thing a person goes through. So here, you don't know. You know what it's going to be. A person could panic. You're not sure. You're not sure what it's going to be. What do we do? What do we know how to do? Right? One thing you have to remember is that everything's in the hand of the Holy One. Everyone's in the hand of God. God's one who runs the world. Right? He's in charge. But, life is hard. We go through difficulties. There is fear. Fear of uncertainty shakes us up. We have uncertainty of our faith, right? We're not sure what's going to be. So, what's the bottom line? Who's guiding us? God is. Torah is. He's going to guide us through this. So now, one major thing here, and that is that this illness, is going to depend on how strong it is, what the dangers are, right? For a patient's, chance of recovery here. So there are a lot of factors involved. First thing is, what if the person, what are the chances of recovery? Someone is sick, God forbid, let's say life-threatening. So whoever can pray for the patient's recovery. Because the Gemara says, and Brachos 12b, that says one who can pray for the ill, it does not, it's called the sinner. Now some say, does that apply to a non-Jew? Does that apply to a Noahide? Yeah, some say it doesn't. Right, it only applies to righteous people. Right, if someone complained, they didn't. Right, maybe that's all it applies to, no one else. I have to see. That's pretty severe. Someone's sick, pray for them. It's cruel. Right, it's being cruel. So the custom is, we say Psalms, we say Torah, in the bed of the sick person. And usually there's a list in the book of Psalms of those that are appropriate to say. So in most places, most Jewish communities, they have set up Tehillim groups, Psalm groups. They gather weekly to recite Tehillim or Psalms for the sick. Now, this would make sense for non-Jews also. For Noahides as well. Because there's a benefit, healing the sick, but also builds cohesion. Builds cohesion among Noahides. Right, it's good, they get together. Right, they get together. They pray together. They say Psalms together. Right, sense of community is crucial. Even though there are not so many, not too many communities out there, per se. Right, that may be true. Right, that may be true, but nonetheless, it's a good thing. Right, no eyes get together. So if a person's sick, really sick, their life depends on it, then in some cases you change the name. Change the name of the sick person, add a name. Right, usually when recovery is uncertain or God forbid, it looks really bad. So add a name. Why? Because it's not the same person, right? When a name is added, when a name is added over here, so it can uproot a heavenly decree. Right? In order to change a name, right? You change the decree, so to speak. Some say it has a metaphysical effect on the soul, right? That's brought down. That is definitely brought down. The name should be changed out of a relative or a righteous person. Let's say lived a long life. Person can change the name, let's say, to Raphael, the name of the angel of healing. Right? Some use the name Chaim, I mean life. Some use the name Raphael. Some use other names. So basically what you do is you add a name to the person's, existing name. Usually at the beginning. Usually at the beginning of their name. So again, if their name was, let's say, Shlomo Zalman, and they had a name, so we call him Raphael Shlomo Zalman, or Chaim Shlomo, or whatever. Right? They had the beginning of the name. Now, a lot of the, very much Stephen Kabbalah. So, question is, would that apply, or should it apply to Noahide? Right? That needs further clarification. But, there is an established Jewish service for changing or adding a name, but we don't see that for non-Jews. Right? Very unclear. But we don't necessarily see it for non-Jews. Right? The whole question whether you need to do it at all. Right? It's a different issue. Right? But in general, by non-Jews should apply. Right? That's what I would say. Right? Shouldn't apply. Now, what happens? Doctors absolutely give up hope. And basically, you're waiting for the end. Then it changes a little bit. Right? There's a Torah thought that's called Ein Som Kanamanes. Right? You don't rely on miracles. Right? That we see in Brachos 54:8, 68, the other sources. Right? It's definitely a fundamental principle in Torah thought. Now again, applying it, that's the whole question. Right? Exactly, who it applies to, or who it doesn't apply to. Right? So, the idea over here is that we should never ever expect God to perform a miracle. Right? Now, could be, let's say a person has a miracle done for them. Let's say they survived something they never should have survived. Could be a lot of their merits get used up. They were supposed to have in the next world. Right? It's kind of like, I don't know, make a big distinction here. It's kind of like playing a video game. Right? You got extra lives. So, let's say you get 10 extra lives. So now, the person's very sick, whatever it is, really should have died, but instead, God takes some of their extra lives. So instead of having 10, they have 3. So it could be a lot of their merits get used up. They get used up now. Protection. Right? There was a story many years ago, more than 20 years ago. There was a football player who jumped in the water to save some people. And he drowned, and a few other people drowned. I think one person got saved, or 2 people got saved. Something like that. What happened? Now, when the person jumped in, everyone's going to say it's meritorious. Unbelievably meritorious. Went to save lives. Right? What was the problem? They know how to swim. So you don't jump in if you don't know how to swim. You're going to go upstairs and say, God, why'd you save me? Now, could be. You didn't have any merit left. You had no merit to be saved. You had no extra lives. Maybe if we would have had extra lives, you would have been saved. Maybe. Right? Possibly. Right? But we should never expect miracles to happen. Never expect. So, this goes further. If God is, let's say, established something as a natural or scientific order, right? we could ask God to change that order, in theory, right, for now. But we don't normally do this. We don't, we should never expect that to happen. Not saying it doesn't happen. Many times doctors say nothing more we can do and the person survives. Or, God forbid, the other way. Right? But it can be absolutely miraculous. They'll say this never should have happened, there's that. They'll say, pray, see what happens. Doctors not in control. Totally not in control. What do they have the ability to heal? Flesh wound. They can't heal anything inside. Why not? Because either they do open heart surgery, do other surgeries, if they sew the person up. What do they say normally? If they're honest, we did everything we could. Now let's see how the body reacts. Now they could say, body could react this way if they're healthy, could react that way. Right? They could gauge it. What should happen? Most people know I'm very big into statistics. They can say, most of the time this should happen. Right? Based on, your health and this and that. Okay. But do they have any guarantee? No. Right? There's a colloquium here. Here in Israel. They say the surgery was successful, but the patient died. Right? You can have that. Surgery successful, patient died. So, once doctors have given up hope, then maybe we're not going to pray as hard. They, nothing to do. Right? Nothing to do over here. So we're not asking for miracles. Right? Some would say that we pray instead the suffering of the sick person's family be removed. You're not praying for them to die. No, they're praying for someone to die in general. Right? That 100% is forbidden. Or, someone's causing us damage, you pray that God should take care of them. Right? The specific prayer about justice, and the Shemona Esrei, silent meditation, whatever you want to call it. Right? So the Gemara says, yeah, that person caused you damage. So the Gemara says, if you invoke that, and you say, God, I want you to take care of business over here, then what's going to be? They're going to open your file. You're going to get judged. You're going to say, why am I getting judged? This person caused me damage. Right? God knows this person caused you damage. Right? So the question is, where's your faith? Got to have faith. Right? Where's your faith over here? So we could ask, if the hopes of all those students, the hearts, which maybe we'll get to after all these classes, down the line, which is going to be, the Sha'ar Emunah b.Tachon, the gate of belief and faith in God. And the Chol of Avos there says, God can use people to get to us as a stick. Meaning, if you hit a dog with a stick, not that I'm advocating that, who does the dog go after? The stick. Or we go after the person. We go after the person wielding the power. Suppose you got in an accident. Someone was texting, went through a red light, whatever it is. They hit your car. What's the first thing you do? If you're not in pain or damage. Go out there and stop screaming at the person. Right? Knee-jerk reaction. You know what the Chol of Avos says? Chol of Avos says, what are you talking about? You should go up to the person, give them a hug, and say, thank you for working on my anger. Now, someone's going to say, come on. He's only talking about the righteous. No. He says over there, many times, this is for everybody. This is the level we have to reach. Right? For everybody. So, we don't know what's going to be. Doctors have no idea. They'll say what should happen according to the person's health, and everything else being equal, etc. But they don't know. They certainly don't know. Maybe it's wishful thinking. But once they sew the person up, no guarantee. No guarantee for anything. That's why when it says they have the ability to heal, they can only heal on the outside. The inside, God takes care of. Now, God wants, you let the person die. Right? So it can be successful. But all the organs go. I remember, I remember my father, of blessed memory, in the hospital for a couple of weeks. He couldn't figure out what was wrong. Try this, try that, the other thing. Finally did a PET scan. They found he had lymphoma. They found out he had lymphoma. So, I spoke to one of my brothers. He says, yeah, it's terminal, but, they give him, 6 months, a year. Nothing imminent. No, that's what the doctor said. Nothing imminent. Right? What happened? He died the next day. All his organs shut down at night. Did they predict that? No. Not at all. Okay. They predicted it was terminal. That's what they said. 6 months to a year. They didn't think he was going to die tonight, the next night. So they don't know. There's a lot of things they don't know. They can conjecture. They can make assumptions. They can be good assumptions. But you know what? No matter. We see one thing by COVID. I'm not going to get into COVID. Right? But one thing we see, with all the advances in medicine, the infectious disease people look really bad. The medical establishment look really stupid. They know what they're doing. They know what they're up against. All the technology in the world. So you tell me the numbers are skewed and, whatever it could be. But it doesn't matter. There's all kinds of things try and shut it down. And God didn't want it to stop. That's the bottom line. So with all their knowledge, what are they showing? A lot. They don't know. Plenty. They don't know. But, they'll pray to science. Because that's all they have. But they can't say why this works, that works. Ask a doctor. Go to a doctor. Right? Give you certain medication. You'll say, why? He said, just take it. It works. So you say, why? Why? And tell me how it works. So probably most doctors, unless they're homeopaths, right, probably can't tell you. Just say it works. And what it does. Fights this, fights that, fights the other thing. Maybe they'll tell you, they're going to say scram. I'm going to go through this. I get all this knowledge. I studied for so many years. Get out of here, scram. I got better things to do with my time. Just take it. Just take it. But they don't have that power. They don't have the power to heal inside. Now, the Gemara says also, Tov sheberoifim legehenim. The best of doctors go to hell. Why the best? Why the best? Because they think they're God themselves. They think they're God themselves. They think they're in charge. And they have the right to say who's going to live, who's going to die, this and that. So even the best are going to go to hell because they're not humble. They see the miracle of the human body and they just take it for granted. They say, oh, that's nature, this, that. Any case, some will say, right, that maybe we should pray that the sick person doesn't suffer anymore. Or God should minimize the suffering. Right? Oh, I want to mention one thing. I forgot to mention. In this idea, you pray that this person get damaged. Right? So why is your file open first? What's the simple explanation? Simple explanation is because you're saying God's not doing his job. Total lack of faith. You're saying God take care of business. You don't think God knows what he's doing? Right? I had a hard time with this. I definitely had a hard time with this. Why should your file get open and God's going to say, oh, you want me to take care of business over here? That's what you want to do? Right? I don't get it. Who are you? Right? Let me open your file now. The only time we want our file open is on Rosh Hashanah. That's it. So what's the explanation? What's the simple explanation? Simple explanation is you're lacking in faith. It's like you're saying God is not doing his job. That's what it sounds like. Right? But, yeah, it's, a person suffers in different ways. A person causes you damage. What do you want? You want revenge. You want God. Take care of this person. Right? What's the problem? What do you think? God's not going to take care of them? If they cause you damage, God's going to take care of them. No question. No question. So it's like it's a lack of faith. It's like a lack of faith over here. That's why your file gets opened first. And it was my boggling idea. I first saw this Gemara, so I learned it very well because, I had certain things that, I didn't want to pray for. certain people cause me damage in different ways. I'm sure Ray's got a whole laundry list. Right? A whole laundry list of people who love to do that with. Right? And it bothered me. It totally bothered me. Why should your file be open first? Right? So I think that's the answer. Is that, who are you over here? You're telling God to take care of business like he doesn't know his job. Right? He doesn't know what he's doing. That's a lack of faith. That's a total lack of faith. Total lack of faith over here. So, we can pray that the person doesn't suffer anymore. Right? We should pray for the welfare of the patient's body and soul. At this point, any prayer specifically requesting healing or recovery, right, is basically the end of the line. So, you can't pray for miracles. Right? You're not going to request for anything miraculous. Also, some are going to hold, once the doctor's given up hope, then you don't have to pray. Right? Some are going to say you don't have to pray. Because there is no hope. Right? There are cases, we know there's no hope. Absolutely no hope. So what are you going to pray for? Right? We should pray. They should be comfortable. They shouldn't suffer. But there are authorities who understand the prohibition against praying for miracles to be inapplicable in the case of life and death. Others are going to say it only applies praying for miracles which would be beyond natural explanation. If it's something, you got a 1% chance, something like that, what are you praying for? What are you praying for miracles for? You shouldn't be doing that. A person could pray for a very unlikely, naturally explicable cure. But if it's not the case, different issue. Right? So once the doctor is basically giving up hope, then a person should, discuss with a, Torah scholar to determine what to do. What the best spiritual course of action is. And one thing for sure, you want to make sure they don't kill the person. Hospitals are notorious. I know the story. So I read a story, of a woman whose mother was very sick. And basically, there were palliative care in the hospital trying to convince her not to do anything heroic, go in a hospice and die, basically. Right? And, she wasn't doing well. And this woman had, a close connection to another doctor. And she's like, get your mother out of this hospital. They'll kill her. 100% is what this doctor said. Get out, they're going to kill her. Otherwise, they're going to kill her. She transferred her. She lived another 10 years. Right? Some doctors are going to see, well, the person's never going to recover anyway. So why take up space here? Just another piece of meat. Let someone else take up the space. That at least has a fighting chance. They don't have a fighting chance. Well, guess what? They would have killed her. 100%. So Rabbeinu Nissim, known as the Ran, in his commentary on Tractate Adarim 48, permits prayer for death or one who's suffering. Right? For one who's suffering, you can pray. You can pray that they should die. Go on the Shulchan, day 355, number 3, Halacha number 3, goes like the Ran, as many other rabbinical authorities, do. According to this, then, you shouldn't pray explicitly for the person to die, but only God should take his soul and end the suffering. Right? We don't want to pray for someone to die per se, but that, that God should end the suffering. That you're allowed to pray for. Now, you look at this, it's kind of strange. The Ran is coming out saying, permissible to pray for someone to die. Someone who's suffering. We're seeing a number of biblical authorities hold this. And there's a lot of debates. A lot of debates. Some say the Ran makes a lot of sense, theoretically. But practically, it shouldn't be done. Right? Practically, you shouldn't pray for someone to die. Others go further. Others say that, no, you reject it totally. No compromise here. You reject what he says. But according to this group, the Ran was only commenting an explanation of the Torah, of the Talmud's discussion, and that wasn't making a practical statement of law. Now, it seems over there, in that Gemara, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, known as Rebbe, or Rabbi Yehuda, he, whatever, he was suffering. He was suffering tremendously. Rabbi Yehuda knows. I think it was Rabbi Yehuda knows. Right, Rabbi Judah the Prince. Right, he wanted to organize the Mishnah. I think that's what he's talking about over there. He was suffering tremendously. So the Ron said, that it's permissible to pray for someone to die. Because he was suffering. Now the question is, was he saying that as just because that's what the Gemara was talking about? Or was he saying that in practical ramifications? Right, so the whole debate over here. So, therefore, any of these questions, you have to go to a court with authority. No jokesters over here. It's life and death. Life and death. So now, what about euthanasia? Killing someone in the process of dying is murder, right? We hold Torah prohibition, right? Torah prohibition, the Rambam says in a few places, Torah prohibition. You hasten someone's death, right? I know someone, father was suffering. So I heard with my own ears. The daughter says, they're suffering too much. We cut off his pacemaker. Well, you know what? When you cut off the pacemaker, the person's going to die. So I asked the doctor, was he going to die anyway? They said, yeah. He's going to die, let's say, within 10 hours. They said he died within 4 or 3 hours. That hastens the death. That you're not allowed to do. You don't have the right to choose when a person deserves to die. So Noahide may passively allow another person to die. Passively, not actively. If it's active, that's murder. Right? To relieve their suffering. Why? Because non-Jews are commanded. And so Leviticus chapter 19, verse 16. They're not commanded over here. Right? Those passive. So if a Noahide of sound mind refuses medical attention, you can do it. Right? They don't have to go through heroics over here. Right? These things don't apply. Now, what about when death is close at hand? Person can pass at any moment, prohibited to move or even touch the patient. Can't touch the patient at all. Why? Because any disturbance could extinguish the fragile flame of life. Right? In other words, you move them, they could die. They're so fragile, you got to be careful. Now, if you're trying to save the person's life, alleviate suffering, different issue. Right? But if that's not the case, you move them, you touch them, and then they, go into shock and die, that's murder. If it's trying to alleviate suffering, different issue. If a patient's on a respirator, the machine may be turned off once the patient is considered critically dead, right? So the question is, critically dead, I think some say go after the brain, if it's brain dead, or the heart stops. I'd always say, I think when the heart stops. Once the heart stops, and they're only being kept alive artificially, right, then you can take them off. You take them off a respirator, right? But if they're on a respirator, so not so simple. Not so simple to take them off. You got to see, are they living only through the respirator or not? You can, you can test it. If they're only artificially living, that's not living, right? Totally not living, so you can take them off, right? Again, you need big people for these questions. Now, what about organ donation? Praiseworthy, great fulfillment of the mitzvah of chesed, doing an act of loving kindness. Now, harvesting of organs often problematic. I just heard someone speak about it today. Right? Interesting. There's certain place, we all know where it is. Right? And they'll have people, let's say, death row. Someone comes in with a lot of money, need a liver, need a kidney, whatever. So they bring this person, quote unquote, to trial, guilty, and they put them under, and they harvest organs. That's forbidden. 100% that's forbidden. Now, many hospitals harvest organs when the patient's very close to death, not actually dead. Also a problem. Also a problem. When the person's dying, take out the lungs now. Well, you know what happens if you take out the lungs? You kill them. I don't recommend it. That's what happens. So, it could be also, which is also bad. You're artificially extending the life in order to allow for the harvesting. That's also bad because the patient's suffering. In other ways. So, we don't allow that. So we don't for Noahides either. Harvesting organs What does that do? We said it hastens to death. Anything that's going to make death quicker, forbidden. 100% forbidden. And what do we say? It's murder. Absolute murder. People think, euthanasia is mercy. Yeah, mercy, that's murder. They're saving the person from further suffering. Oh, so now you're playing God, right? I think I told the story before that there was a story. Someone became an Orthodox Jew telling the story of the doctor, and he had a patient was on a respirator, and it wasn't getting better, and whatever. So the family decided to pull the plug. Now, obviously, in this case, it was forbidden, right? So what happened? This guy has a dream. That night, guy has a dream. That soul came to him in a dream. Brother was in coma for a while. And the doctor has this dream. Normally we say dreams don't mean anything. This is pretty significant. The soul comes to him. He says, you murdered me. I was waiting there. I could have gone straight into paradise. I wouldn't have had to suffer. I needed a few more days. You murdered me. I'm suffering now in Gehenna. I'm now in hell. The doctor woke up in a sweat, as we could imagine. Tried to brush it off, this and that, in the same dream next night. You murderer! Like, imagine. So a person sitting there, lying there, they're unconscious. You don't know what's going on. You have no idea. They're just, they can hear you. There's a story of somebody with a bad car accident, right, in early 20s. Was in a coma for a long time. And the parents were deciding whether they should pull the plug or not. And he's like screaming, don't kill me, don't murder me. This and that. Eventually came back. They ended up killing him, and he came out of it, right? But he was saying, I can see everything, I can hear everything, but no one can hear me. So you have no idea. They'll say, oh, even if it comes out of it, it's going to be brain damage, this and that. Could be, could not be. They don't know. They don't know for sure, right? In any case, harvesting organs, hastening death is what? Is murder. We hold it's murder. Person has to be clinically dead first. Cannot take any organ out unless they're clinically dead. Even if the recipient of the donated organ is gravely ill. Still forbidden over here. Right? Just because they're gravely ill doesn't mean you can carve them up like a science project. Who says? Who says? They're not dead yet. Right? You gotta wait. We mentioned before, we spoke about abortion. Right? Seems like Noahides can violate any of the commandments for the sake of preserving a life. Yeah. Question is, what about murder? Who says they can do that for murder? Right? Murder should be thrown out. Right? So, organ donation has to be done the right way. You have to wait till the person's clinically dead. If you take out organs that causes the person to die, or die quicker, that's murder. Right? That's murder. So a lot of these cases of organ harvesting, which is forbidden anyway, is outright murder. Right? Many cases is outright murder. Let's say like this. Being very close to death and death are two different things. Just because a person's close to death, it doesn't mean I can do whatever I want to them. Right? Like I said, you can carve them up like a science project. Who says? They're not dead. They're not dead. But people looking at them like they are, right? This person's not going to make it. They only have so much longer, this and that. But they're not dead. They're not dead. You hasten their death. It's murder. Right? Like I said, I heard someone say, my father was suffering, going through all this suffering. Right? So they cut off his pacemaker. Oh, guess what happens when you cut off a pacemaker? They die quicker. That's murder. 100%. It's murder. Right? I went to this mourner's house. That was a relative, happened to. I hear the daughter say this. I was like, what? I was like, hey, they just murdered him. Totally murdered him. So, but what was someone going to say? He was suffering too much. We wanted to put him out of his misery. Well, that's very good. I understand the idea. You don't want to make someone suffer more, but you have no idea what's going on over there. Who gives you the right to call the shots? Gives the doctor the right to call the shots. It's murder. We think of murder as like, you shoot someone. You kill someone, you throw them over a cliff, you run over them. I don't know. What different ways we can think of murder. You say, Rabbi, what movies have you been watching lately? Now, general. A lot of different ways. They're not going to see this as murder. They're not going to see abortion as murder. Right? Even though an abortion, God forbid, it's not an entity. Until the baby comes out. So we don't hold that way. Question is within 40 days or not. Right? Sometimes you'll be allowed to do later abortion. Depends on a lot of circumstances. Right? But in such a case, they think, this isn't murder. This is mercy. Right? That's why you need oral law over here. Right? Because the Torah says, one of the 10 commandments, don't murder. So what about self-defense? And then you just murder the person? No, it's not premeditated. You're saving yourself. Okay, now you're coming up with your own definitions. Torah doesn't give definition. It just says, don't murder. Right? So Noahide's been doing this, after 120 years. They're going to say, what do you mean? I'm not forcing the world to come? I didn't murder anyone. God said, what are you talking about? I got all this over here. No, that's different. That was mercy. God's like, no. So he says, come on, that's mercy. So a lot of times this is extremely problematic. Right? You gotta wait for the person to be clinically dead. They're not clinically dead. It's over. Right? That's murder. Yeah, so any questions on any of that? Organ donation, near death, praying for someone to die, someone who's suffering, praying in general, someone who's sick. Any questions on any of that? By the way, no one should ever be in such a situation. Right? But you have to, if you got siblings and, your parents are still alive or whatever, one of the things you got to make sure, you got to try to the best of your ability, is to make sure that they don't, they don't get killed, that they don't murder them. Right? You do whatever you can to stop it, if possible. Like I said, I've heard stories. Siblings arguing this, that. You do whatever you can to save the person. Otherwise, it's murder. Total murder here. Yeah, any questions on any of that? Someone asks, what is someone with cancer? Treated with chemo, not fully cooperating with treatment. Yeah, I'll tell you a case like this. A person, if they're going through treatment, it's going to suffer. Right? I know the stories happened, 15 years ago, 10 years ago. There was somebody that had a kidney transplant. They had a kidney transplant probably 35, 40 years ago. So 30 years later, 35 years later, the other kidney starts to go. Now, they weren't a candidate for different reasons for another kidney. So they had to go on dialysis. Now, if you go on dialysis, you can extend your life, by a number of years. But dialysis is painful. You're in the hospital a long time, right, etc. So I asked the question, is that suicide? Is that suicide? So the answer was, Rabbi answered me, they don't have to go through suffering if they don't want to. They can't directly kill themselves, right? So here, they're not fully cooperating with treatment, and that's closer to death. Okay, but why are they not taking the treatment? They don't want to go through it. They don't want to suffer anymore. They're allowed to. That's not suicide, right? Suicide means you're doing something direct. You're taking a syringe, you put it in, whatever it is. I know another story. It's indirect. Person has a stroke, right? Person has a stroke, and the kid does the same thing. Something went off in their brain. And what was the criteria? You want to hear this? You'll never believe it. What's the criteria? Person can't really function so well because they can't play Sudoku. I can't make that up. I heard it with my own ears. Can't play Sudoku. Lifestyle was living. I don't know. Whatever it is. So this person, what did he do? He basically refused to eat. He didn't want to live. Right? So you know what happens when you don't eat, you don't drink that much? First of all, you lose a lot of weight, but you get very weak. So basically, within a month or so, they had to put him in hospice. They put him in hospice. And what happened? He just got weaker and weaker, and he died. Right? That's exactly what happened. Now, is that suicide? Not suicide. there are people, I know of another story. Someone had a major stroke, and they didn't want to do anything to rehabilitate. They didn't want to go through all the rehabilitation. So what happened? They died. They didn't help themselves. Now, the question is, are you obligated? Right? The philosophical question. Are you obligated to help yourself in such a thing? Let's say you have to go through a lot more suffering. Going through chemo is not fun. Certainly not fun. Right? A lot of side effects. A lot of bad side effects. With chemo. True. So let's someone decides they don't want chemo. So what's going to happen? Cancer is just going to spread. Right? But that's not suicide. Right? They don't want to suffer. They don't want to go through that suffering. Just like person, right? They want to go through dialysis. Understandable. Right? Understandable, but that's not suicide. Now, if it's passive, that you're right. They're closer to death. They might be closer to death, but it's not direct. They're not doing it direct. You tell me you're not getting so much treatment. True. Right? But you don't have to. Who says you have to suffer? Who says you have to be a martyr? Go through it. You don't have to. You can't directly do anything. That's indirect. Indirect is okay. Indirect is not murder. Totally not murder. Right, so that's what's going to happen. That's never going to happen. That someone's not going to eat solid food to gain weight. What's going to happen? They're going to emaciate. 100%. They're going to emaciate. That's what's going to happen. So, that's their choice. Right? But that's not suicide. What about somebody, has cancer, they go to hospice, right? When they go to hospice, they don't kill them directly, but they give them barely enough nutrients to live. So they're very weak. Now, what's the secondary cause of cancer? Secondary cause of cancer is pneumonia. Right? A person normally gets pneumonia and that kills them because they don't have an immune system to fight it. So why isn't that murder? If they didn't give them any nutrients at all, they starved them to death, that's murder. Right? This is indirect. It's indirect over here. If a person will endure the pain, does that help to bring some atonement? Very good question. So one of the great commentaries says, if a person's suffering, they have to say they're suffering for their sins to get atonement. Suffering alone is not enough. I know everyone agrees with that. Right? But, I know there's such an idea. You have to acknowledge the suffering is because of sin. If you acknowledge suffering is because of sin, that atones. That 100%. Right? That according to this will atone. Right, but suffering in general, they don't acknowledge it. Who says that atones? You can say all suffering atones? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Let's say a person's unconscious. Like this case where the doctor killed him. Person's unconscious. Right? He knows he's going through all that. His soul understands it. Why? Because he's suffering now. He's suffering now to atone. And he said, this soul said, had you let me sit there another few days, another week, whatever it was, that suffering was enough. There's a story. Let me tell me this story with Mordechai Pogamansky, a blessed memory. He was an absolute genius, total genius. He died shortly after World War II. He was dying of cancer, and he was blind. They wanted to give him morphine. And, he was racked in pain. So what did he say? When he heard they wanted to give him morphine, so he sat up, with all his strength, looked up to heaven and said, God, do whatever you want to my body. You give me all the pain because I'm coming straight to you, to Gan Eden. I'm coming straight to you to paradise. You rack my body with whatever you want. You destroy my body. That's fine because I'm coming straight to you. I'm going to come straight to you. I'm not going to suffer. I'll take all the suffering now. Now, who's holding there? Who's gonna say such a thing? Right? He said that. That's what he said. Right? Someone of the last generation, not 500 years ago. The last generation. Right? It's an unbelievable individual. He understood. He understood the physical pain atones. And he wanted so much physical pain. That it should atone for everything. That you go into paradise no impediments. Doesn't have to suffer. Doesn't have to go to hell to get him to be rectified. Right? So how many people are going to wish for that? Imagine a person with unbelievable amount of pain. Unbelievable amount of pain. The body's racked in pain. They're blind. Other things. And someone has the ability to say such a thing. That's unbelievable. Right? But that's the right mentality. How many people are going to be able to do that? Probably very few. Right? But again, he was, a totally different individual. So, therefore, he was willing to say, God, give it all to me. Give me all the punishment you can think of. Rack my body with all the pain. I could care less. Because I'm coming straight to you to paradise. Right? I'm going to come straight. No impediments. Not going to hell. Give me all the punishment now. Yeah, I don't think most people are holding there. And then we don't think that. But that's what he said. So, as far as I understand, a person has to acknowledge the suffering. I don't know if everyone agrees with that. Right? But, just going through the suffering may not be enough. Right? You may have to acknowledge the suffering is because of sin. If you acknowledge the suffering is because of sin, then you get the atonement. Otherwise, maybe not. Yeah, any other questions? Listen, it's terrible things to see. See people in pain. See people suffer. Right? It's hard. Never would agree. Right? But again, there are laws governing what we do and how we do it. There's a fine line here between helping someone and killing them. What they say, it's mercy. Yeah, any other questions? All right, let me see. There's another question coming in. All right, good. So if there are no other questions, then I'm going to sign out. Anyone has any questions, feel free. Shoot me an email. Otherwise, I'm going to sign out. Wish everyone a good middle of the day or almost end of the day for me. And everyone have a great rest of the week.